recording from last class or like look at anything from it? Not yet. Okay. Well, whatever. I'll still record it. Did anyone click the link and like make sure it works? Nope. Even better. Yeah. Okay. So cool. Good to know that I sat in my office for an hour waiting for that video to process. All for nothing.
It works. I tried.
Okay, good. All right, good. Thank you. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about trade, international trade, and tariffs. Okay, and so what the hell? Here we go. All right, there we go. So in the context of trade, let's just kind of start there, right? So like, why do we trade with other people? My tie is way too short. That's embarrassing. Whatever. Okay, so why do we trade with other people? Like, why do I go buy my groceries from the grocery store instead of just growing them in my backyard?
For the convenience. Some people are better at getting certain products than you.
Okay, so there's like a convenience factor, right? So it's definitely true that like if I really want like a watermelon, for example, and I didn't grow any watermelons, it's super convenient for me to just go to D&W, give them like $3, and then I've got, a watermelon, right? Like that's awesome. Okay. Why else would it be, let me ask you this question. Would it be cheaper for me to grow my own watermelons?
Probably.
Anyone?
Yes. Well,
anyone
depends
agree
if you
with them
factor in
or
labor.
disagree? Oh, sorry, go for it. Say it again.
So it depends if you factor in labor, your time and labor.
Okay, so once I factor in my time and labor, what do you think? Is it cheaper or more expensive for me to grow my own watermelons?
Probably more expensive.
Yeah, right. Turns out like I have this thing called an opportunity cost. There's a lot of things that I could be doing instead of working on whatever I would call the farm in my backyard, right? And so it's actually cheaper in terms of like my time cost, my effort cost, and just the sheer fact that I can't even keep like a plant alive in my office, right? Like it's dying and I don't know what to do about it except like put more water on it, I guess. I don't know, right? So I would probably be terrible at growing watermelons, which means it's way cheaper for me to just go buy a watermelon than it is for me to try to grow one. Like setting aside even the convenience costs or the convenience factors that we talked about, before. Okay, so when we're trading with one another, what we're kind of doing is we're just like exchanging stuff. All right, so like when I buy something, what am I giving up in order to get in this case, watermelon? It's not a trick. It starts with an M, rhymes with honey.
Money.
Yeah, I give up money, right? Which I earned, by teaching you guys all stuff like this, right? So I like goof off in my office and talk to a webcam, and then dollars show up in my bank account, and then I go to the grocery store and I buy a watermelon, right? It's if you think about that, it's like kind of weird, okay? So I give up money and I acquire watermelons. What does D&W do? Well, they give up watermelons and they acquire money. So if you were to think about this, if you think about like the pure logic of choice, which one do I value more highly? The money that I give up or the watermelon?
Watermelon.
Yeah, I must value the watermelon more, right? So like I'm made better off, right? Which is why, incidentally, when I go to the cash register and I give them money and they give me the watermelon, what 2 words do I usually say? Or what
Thank
2
you.
words? Yeah, you say thank you, right? You say when you pay for your stuff at any store, you say thank you to the teller, right? And so again, pure logic of choice, which one's worth more to D&W? The watermelon that they give up or the money that they receive?
Money.
Yeah, it must be the money, right? Kind of like that song. Okay, so for them, right, they give up a watermelon, which they value low, and they receive money, which they value high, right? And then the teller, if they're like polite, what do they say to you after you've said thank you?
You're
I'm
welcome.
assuming you're welcome.
Well, so most people assume you're welcome because no one ever listens to them, right? Because you just say thank you, put your stuff, and you like walk out, right? Okay. But next time you go buy something, listen, because if they're polite, they'll actually say thank you, right? Which is kind of weird because you've just thanked them for selling you whatever it is. And now they're thanking you for buying their product, right? But the reason they're doing that is because they're made better off. And the reason you're saying thank you is because you're made better off. And so you end up with this, what we call a double thank you, where both people are like, hey, thanks, that was awesome. Let's do it again, which, by the way, is what thank you means. It means, hey, I enjoyed that. Can you do that again, right? If you compare that to like giving a gift, right? You say, like you give someone a gift, they say thank you, and you just say, oh, you're welcome, right? So it's like totally different. But with commercial activity, both people end up saying thank you. With gift giving, only one thank you happens. Okay. So with this kind of stuff in mind, do you think economists quibble about who we're trading with or like where those people exist? So like if I bought something from Japan, do you think that that thing that I bought, would I value it more than the money I give up or less? So like, let's say I bought a TV that was made in Japan. Do I value the TV or the money more?
And TV.
Yeah, it must be the TV, right? And the company in Japan, do they value the money or the TV more?
The money.
The money, right? And so again, both of us would be saying thank you to each other if we ever met, right? And so we're both again made better off. So here's kind of the thing. When we talk about like just trade, everything kind of makes sense. You know, we go to the grocery store, we're like, yeah, this is great. Isn't this wonderful? But when we start talking about like international trade, when we put that second word up there, everyone starts thinking that it's way more complicated than it actually is. And it turns out people in other countries are just people, and they're making stuff and they're selling stuff, and sometimes you buy from it. Okay, so if you read the syllabus, I believe, I can't remember if it's still in there, but I talked about how there's like apparently a trade war, and you know, we're firing like trade bullets, and I'm not sure what direction we're pointing, but if it's a war, then we should probably win it, right? But I don't know what winning a trade war looks like. So maybe it's carnage, maybe it's peace, I don't know. War seems to suggest carnage though. Okay, so here's kind of some of the questions that I want us to think about tonight. Is it the case that we need to protect our domestic industries from foreign competition? Is it the case that we should reduce our dependence on foreign oil, right? Or should we do everything we can to make sure that good, honest, high-paying manufacturing jobs stay right here in America? Okay, so let's just kind of consider the following. So we had this one guy who was the president for a few years, and you know, his name was Donald Trump, right? How did he feel about China? Was he like, they're our best friends, or did he not like them at all?
He was not a fan.
Yeah, not a fan, right? And so if you remember, he slapped a big tariff on like Chinese steel, aluminum, and a few other like goods. Okay, so just as a quick note so we can have this discussion, a tariff is just a special tax on imports. All right, so if you have a tariff on Chinese steel, American steel companies don't have to pay that tax. Chinese steel companies do. Okay, so like President Trump wasn't really a big fan of China, and so he enacted a whole bunch of tariffs on them. Okay, but here's kind of the thing. How many of you remember the president before Trump? Right? So here's the thing. If I say that to my undergrad students, they're like, not really. He was just like some dude. And I'm like, yeah, that's not false. Okay. So from 2004 to 2008, China tripled their exports of tires to the US. Okay. And so in 2009, President Obama issued a 35% tariff on all Chinese tires. Right. So this like not really enjoying China thing, it wasn't exclusive to the Republicans. It's actually across both sides. Turns out everyone just wants to raise tariffs on China. I don't know why. I don't know what they did, but apparently we're really upset about them. Okay. So like Obama's done it, Trump's done it, Bush did it, Clinton sort of didn't do it, but like kind of did. It was a weird one. Bush 1 did it. Reagan kind of did it. I don't think Carter did. I don't remember. Okay. But pretty much everyone likes to raise tariffs on China. We just beat up on them, and I don't really know why. Okay.
Dr. Hubert, I have a
Yeah.
question. These tariffs, are they you said exported goods, so there's specific taxes. So like for that one, was that specifically just on tires, or was it a 35% increase across the board on exports? I guess my question is,
Yeah.
Is it specific to a specific export, or is it just whatever they're shipping for you?
Yeah, so usually what you'll do is instead of saying like we're going to tax tires, is you slap a tariff on rubber. So it's usually on like some specific material or good that's made out of that material, right? So if you like imported raw rubber from China, that would count. If you imported, steel ball bearings from China, that would count under the Trump tariffs as like steel, right? So the tariff is always on like specific things. It's usually not on all imports. You can do that. There's nothing stopping you, but usually it's on specific goods, right? It's not like a sales tax where it's on everything. It's like a special, it's kind of like a gas tax, right? The gas tax, you only pay the gas tax when you buy gas, right? These tariffs, you only pay the tariff when you buy specific things. Is that cool?
Yeah, okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just start thinking about like, what were the effects? Okay, and let's do specifically the effects of the tire/rubber one. Since I've got some good data, and then we'll talk about the steel aluminum one. Okay, so what happened to the US market for tires as a result of this tariff placed on Chinese tires? Okay, so if you are at all familiar with tires, are there any US-based tire manufacturing companies? And if so, what are they? Like, what are some examples?
Goodyear.
Yeah, Goodyear, right? What else?
Firestone.
Firestone, right? I feel like there's one more, but I can't remember anymore.
Is Continental US?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, Continental, Michelin, I believe is, or are they French? I can't remember. I don't know, right? Because I know they're like the Michelin stars. I think it's a US company. Okay, so let's just go with Goodyear and Firestone. How do you think Goodyear and Firestone felt as a result of these tariffs? Were they pro or anti?
Very pro.
Yeah, why were they so pro?
Less competition.
Yeah, so basically we made it more expensive for Americans to go buy foreign tires, right? And we're going to simplify the world and pretend that there's only China and there's only the US, right? So we'll make things like really easy for us. So if Chinese tires are now more expensive, what are American tire consumers going to do? Well, they're going to buy American tires because American tires and Chinese tires would be substitutes, right? They're basically the same thing. They can be used mostly interchangeably, right? And so what happened is the price for tires in the US increased. right? And it increased across the board. So Chinese tires obviously got more expensive because of the tariff, but US tires also got more expensive, okay? And so now it's more expensive for you to buy tires. So what do you think happened to the amount of tires being purchased in total by US consumers?
It decreased.
Yeah, right. So fewer tires were sold, more American tires were sold than previously, but the total number of tires, so China plus American tires, that total decreased. What consumer of tires do you think was like hardest hit by, this increase in the price? Or like what type of consumer was hit the hardest?
I'm assuming the manufacturers.
Okay, so
Our
manufacturers, yeah, the people making tires were hit pretty hard, right? But let's say like let me ask the question maybe a different way. What part of the US economy, if you want to call it that, uses the most tires per year?
The working class?
Okay, so working class, but specifically it was like truck drivers and like people driving those trucks, long distances, right? If you look at like the 18-wheelers, they have 18 wheels, right? And they're driving thousands upon thousands of miles per year. You and I, right, we've got 4 wheels and we're driving, thousands of miles, but truck drivers are driving a lot further. So what we saw was truck drivers, instead of buying new tires whenever their tires would wear out, they would actually take them to, some factory or some mechanic shop and get the tires retreaded, which basically means they like shaved off the remaining tread of the tire, roughed it up a little bit, and then slapped on some really special glue and glued new tread around the tire. And like that was how they fixed the problem. So if you might recall, have you guys ever seen like blown out tires on the highway? Like those big patches of rubber off on the side? That was it was much more common in the years after 2009, because it turns out retreaded tires blow a lot more frequently than brand new tires. And so what happens? Well, you had a lot more car accidents as a result of people driving around on retreaded tires. Okay. So that might be one effect. What else happened? So what happened with the steel and aluminum ones? Right? Anyone notice that some beer companies had a hard time keeping up with filling they're putting their beer in cans after Trump passed the steel and aluminum tariffs? Where's the guy that works at Founders? Or is he not in tonight? All right, well, no, I know. Okay. So what ends up happening, right, is steel and aluminum become more expensive. And so anyone using steel and aluminum in their production process faces higher costs of production, which means less of that stuff is being made available for consumers. And all those things, the prices all went up. So like in Michigan, you might have anyone here go to Brewery Vivant or like know of it?
Yeah, their duck nachos are great.
Right. Oh, they're fantastic. Right. You should, if you're getting really adventurous, get the poutine, but ask them to put the duck nacho, like duck, on the poutine. It's the best.
What's this called?
That's a good idea.
It's called Brewery Vivant.
Okay,
Right.
I need this.
Yeah. Go check it out. It's fantastic.
You have to try their duck nachos. I'm not
Oh,
kidding. It'll
yeah.
change your life.
Just go. That's your dinner. You're done.
I
Okay.
got you.
And so, so you might know this, right? If you notice that they've shifted from making the tall cans to the short cans.
Yeah, I did notice that.
Yeah. Do you know why?
Probably because aluminum is more expensive.
Yep. Okay. So they can make more smaller cans, right? By using, they make more cans by using less aluminum. Okay. And so all these factors, right? These things have effects. They do stuff. And it's not just some like innocent little thing that like doesn't do anything. Okay, so let's get back to a few things. So anyone here drink orange juice? Like ever? Yeah. If you're buying orange juice in Michigan, where do you think the oranges probably came from? Were they grown?
Florida.
Yeah,
Florida.
they
Florida.
weren't, clearly were not grown in Michigan, right? Like that, can we all agree that that would be patently absurd, right? And like, why would it be absurd to grow oranges in Michigan?
Weather.
Yeah,
Doesn't
turns out
matter.
like what, 6 months out of the year there's snow or the threat of snow, right? And so, oranges don't exactly do well in snow. And so we don't grow oranges here. But like, if you think about it, the same logic that says, hey, we should buy American instead of buying foreign, right? Because we're trying to protect American jobs. Wouldn't that also imply that we should stop buying Florida oranges and only buy Michigan oranges to protect Michigan jobs? Right? Like that kind of seems like the same exact logic. Like, sure, those people in Florida are Americans, right? But they're still Floridians and we're Michiganders and we're better, right? So shouldn't we like ban intrastate commerce to protect jobs in our state? Or maybe not.
I can't say that I've ever personally thought that buying something out of state would hurt my state, especially if it was something like that Michigan couldn't do.
Well, we can, right? We have greenhouses. We could just build a whole bunch of greenhouses and heat them, right? And then we could
Yeah.
grow oranges there. If Iceland can grow
That sounds
tomatoes,
really expensive. That sounds really expensive.
yeah, but it can be done.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it turns out it's just way cheaper for us to buy oranges from Florida, right? And that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make through like the back door, if you will, right? Is to point out like, hey, there's some stuff that we as Americans are just really, really good at, right? We have the right weather for it. We have the right skills and training for it, right? Whatever, reason is, like, we're just really good at doing, X, Y, and Z, whatever those three things are. And other countries, well, they're really good at different things because they have different weather and different cultures and different people and different plants and different whatever, right? And so it's not really protecting or hurting jobs to trade with someone else. You're just getting that thing at a lower price. And that sounds kind of cool. Okay, so you can think about intrastate, like trade across state lines, lets us enjoy Florida oranges. If you ever had salmon, odds are good it came from Alaska. If you have crab, pretty good chance it comes from Maryland. We have Omaha steaks from Nebraska, Hawaiian pineapples. So like if you're eating pineapples, really likely that it came from Hawaii instead of like some other place in the US. But then at the same time, what does Michigan specialize in producing? Like, what are we amazing at making compared to basically every other state?
Apples.
Yeah, we're really good at apples, right? We're
Cherries.
real. Say that again.
Berries.
Yeah, cherries. Like we're fantastic at cherries. Pumpkins, right? I would throw in cars, right? So like we're still pretty good at cars. There's some places outside of Michigan that are like trying to fight for number one. But last I checked, we're still number one at producing cars, right? You ever drive past a sugar beet farm? Right? Turns out we're really good at making sugar, right? So by us importing, if you think of it this way, Florida oranges, well, we can export sugar. We can export cars. We can export pumpkins and cherries and apples and sweet corn, right? And asparagus. We're like the best at asparagus, okay? And so if you like are okay with us doing that kind of stuff between states, economists might say like, hey, it seems pretty logical that you'd be okay with us doing it, across international borders too. That's just the same thing. It's just someone else is like, he looks different from you. And like, that's about it. And he might not even do that. Okay, so what I want to do is try to show some of like the gains from trade. Okay, and remember, we've got our like supply and demand, right? Our downward sloping demand curve, our upward sloping supply curve, and we've got our equilibrium price. All right, let's call it P1, and then we've got Q1, right? And all that good stuff. So I'm going to elaborate on what these curves actually mean a little bit tonight. So what the demand curve shows us is the maximum amount that a customer is willing to pay. For a specific quantity. And this is all per unit. Okay, so if the demand curve was given by, P equals 10 minus Q, right? Well, that would be, and let's say supply is given by P equals Q. We'll keep it really simple, right? This becomes 5 and this becomes 5, right? And I'll leave it to you to double check my math, but I know that that's the right answer. Okay, so what we've got would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so the maximum amount that this customer would be willing to pay for the first unit, right? Well, what I would do is I'd plug 1 in right here, and I would get 9. Right, so the maximum they're willing to pay is $9, right? But they're only paying $5. Is everyone with me so far on this? Okay, and if they were to buy a second one, the maximum they'd be willing to pay for that second one would be $8. And again, they're only paying 5, right? For the third one, the max they would be willing to pay is $7, right? For the fourth one, the max they're willing to pay would be $6, right? And for the fifth one, the max I'm willing to pay is 5, right? And they do pay 5. And so if you think about it, for the first one, they're willing to pay $9 for it. They only have to pay 5. So we could say that they got $4 of like surplus value. Does that kind of make some sense? Right? They bought something that's worth $9 to them and they only paid 5. Right? So let me ask you this. Have you ever gone to the store and like gotten really excited about, the price you paid for something? Or have you ever gotten like a really great deal on Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, Etsy, any of those places? You guys ever experienced this like joy?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So what was the last thing that you bought that you were like really excited about that you got a great deal on?
I bought artwork for my living room.
Cool, right? So like it came in and you were like, yes, this is amazing. I love it, right? Are you one of those people that if you buy something and someone points out like, hey, that's a really nice, piece of art or whatever, do you tell them how good of a deal you got on the art?
Absolutely. Yes.
Right? Yeah. Okay. So you're Dutch like my wife is, right? So
Yes.
my wife goes on like Facebook Marketplace and she'll come home with like this giant crate of baby clothes, right? And so like we have like 800 shirts for this like kid, right? He's 2, okay? But she only spent $5. And so she's like, I had to. I couldn't not. It was impossible for me to turn down this gigantic crate of baby clothes for $5. And she will tell that story to everyone she bumps into. Like she goes to Starbucks in the morning, like, hey, how's your day? It's like, it's great, but not as good as yesterday because I bought this many clothes for $5, right? So she, in that context, and you in the context of your art, you were probably willing to pay more than you did but you didn't have to, right? And so you were like, yes, this is amazing. So economists call all that feeling, we call that consumer surplus. Okay, and so like for the first in whatever this case is, the first one, well, it would be, you know, the $4 that's like right here, like this area right there. For the second unit, they're willing to pay $8. They only pay $5. And so we'd say that they got $3 of consumer surplus on that one. For the second one, or I'm sorry, for the third unit, they were willing to pay $7. They only paid $5, so they got $2. All right, so they got $4 here, $3 here, $2 there. Right, for the fourth unit, they were willing to pay $6. They only paid $5, so they got an extra $1 of consumer surplus. And then for the fifth one, they were willing to pay $5. They did pay $5, so they got $0. All right, 0 surplus. And if you think about it, we can add all these numbers up. So that'd be $7, $9, $10. $10 of consumer surplus. Does that kind of make sense how I just did that? Right? And really, if you allow for people to buy like fractions of a unit, so they could buy like half of something or a quarter of something, then the consumer surplus is really just this whole triangle right here. Right? So it would be so consumer surplus is all the area above price. I'm going to switch to a new marker. And below the demand curve. Right, so it's all the area above this price and below this demand curve. I guess I'll make this. So far, so good? Okay. Can I erase this? I guess we can always just go back and watch it, right? Okay. So that's the gains to the consumer, right, from an exchange is the consumer surplus. Let's talk about the producer. So again, demand P is equal to 10 minus Q, supply P is equal to Q.
Dr. Huber, can you write just a little bit bigger?
Oh, of course.
Thank you.
All right, sorry. It's just such a small whiteboard, and I get confused about how big I'm writing, and I can't zoom my camera in, which really bothers me. Okay, so demand is P equals 10 minus Q. Is that good? Is that big enough?
Yeah, that's much better. Thank you.
Yeah. And supply is P equals Q. Okay. And so once again, I'm just going to draw, the exact same picture. All right, I got my supply curve, got my demand curve, quantity, price, and the equilibrium is going to be still at $5 and 5, units of this stuff. Okay. And so what that equilibrium price means, just to kind of reiterate, is that for whatever units we're selling, you're going to sell it for $5 and people are going to buy it for $5. But here's kind of the thing. We've got our, first, second, third, and fourth. Okay. So for the first unit, I can plug a 1 in, here, and I'm going to get 1 out. So for the first unit, this store might have been willing to sell it for just $1. And for the second unit, they might be willing to sell it for $2. Right? And the third, $3. And the fourth, $4. I know I wrote those small, it's just because I didn't have space, right? But it's just 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And so what that means is that they were willing to sell that first unit for $1, but they got to sell it for $5, right? So at some level, there's like $4 of gains to them from selling that first one. And then the second one, right? They're willing to sell it for $2. They did sell it for $5. And so there's $3 of gains. And we could continue on, right? The third one, there'd be $2 of gains. The fourth one, there'd be $1 of gain. The fifth one, there'd be 0, right? And that also adds up to 10 as the total, okay? And so this area, like this whole triangle here, is going to be what we call a producer surplus. And so producer surplus would be the gains from trade for the producers or sellers. Okay. And the easy way to find it is that it is the area above supply and below price. Does this all kind of make sense? So, so if we combine, right, remember this triangle up here had an area of $10, and this triangle down here, we just figured out, has an area of $10. What this means is that society is $20 richer from these trades. All right, so remember we said like, hey, you know, if I buy the watermelon, that must mean that I value the watermelon more than the dollars. Well, that's me talking about my consumer surplus from having purchased the watermelon, right? And then when we said, hey, the store must value the money more than they value the watermelon, well, that was us just talking about the store's producer surplus, right? And so just by like moving the watermelon from like their hands to mine and the money from my hands to theirs, right? We've not only made like their accounting profit, like so the total number of dollars they've come in, that's gone up, obviously, but our total like value of who has what resource in terms of society, right? That's gone up by 20 bucks. They're happier by $10 and I'm happier by $10. Does that kind of make sense? Andy, you with me? Okay, just making sure. I saw you zoom in like real close and I was like, oh man, what's he doing? Okay. So let's use this to start thinking about international trade too. And I'm not gonna use any equations here because I don't need them, all right? But we could, all right? So in my undergrad class on Tuesday, one of the people in there said, you know, Dr. Hebert, are we going to use like a lot of graphs in this class? Or because like I'm getting tired of drawing graphs. And I was like, okay, I'll use equations instead. Right? And they're like, no. All right, so we could do it with equations, but I think graphs are more fun. But if you want equations, I'm happy to provide them, I guess. Okay, so we'll do that. I'll do there. Now they'll get refreshed. So let's apply all this to international trade. Okay, and let's just think about like what must be true. Okay, so I'm going to make a slightly more complicated picture than we had before. Okay, let's call this the demand for, let's stick with tires, just because, I don't know. right? This is the demand by US citizens for tires, okay? And for simplicity, let's just assume that like Chinese tires and American tires are exactly identical. The only difference is where they were made. Okay, so we're gonna like ignore a whole bunch of things that are probably true. Okay, so this is like the demand for tires by US people, right? And they don't care where the tires come from. They just care about, does the tire work and how much does it cost? Okay, and then we have the supply. Oops, I'll draw that thicker. Right, so we have the supply of US made tires. Okay, so this is only United States producers of tires. Okay, and that's going to get us, some equilibrium price and some equilibrium quantity. Okay, and so here's kind of my question to you. If some American consumers are willing to import tires or buy tires from China, what must be true about the price of tires in China compared to the price of tires in the US?
They're cheaper.
Yeah, which tires are cheaper?
The China
Yeah.
tires.
Yeah, the China tires, right? Must be cheaper than the US tires, right?
That's
And that-
really hard to say, by the way.
What's that?
That's really hard to say, by the way. China tire, I don't know. China
Yeah,
tire.
Yeah,
Say it.
maybe I shouldn't have done tires. Maybe we should have done steel. But anyway, okay. So it must be the case that the Chinese tires are less expensive than the US tires. And so what we can do is I can just say like, hey, there's like a world price for tires, right? And it's below this amount here. Okay, so if the world price for tires is below P star, and let's say again, like these tires are like perfect substitutes. Consumers don't care if the tire came from America or from China. What's the highest price that American tire companies can charge if they want to sell any tires?
I'm assuming it's the PW plus the tariffs.
Yeah, well, yeah, so we haven't gotten to tariffs yet. So right now there's no tariff. There's just, you can buy them from America or China, right? And so, but you're getting ahead of me and that's fine. So like if an American tire company charged more than PW, whatever that number is, then they wouldn't sell any tires because the American tire buyers would just buy from someone else who's cheaper, right? It's kind of like, if D&W started charging $7 for a gallon of milk, well, you'd probably go to Meijer and buy the milk there instead, right? It's the same milk, right? And so the highest price they can charge must be this PW. And so we can come straight over. And what that lets us do is figure out how many tires Americans want to buy. So at this PW, we want to purchase this many tires, right? And I'll put some numbers down below just to like make all this a little bit clearer. But at this world price, American tire producers are only willing to produce, this many tires, right? So let me go ahead and put some numbers in here, right? And these are going to be completely unrealistic numbers in terms of like the actual number of tires bought. So let's say this number is like 500. This number could be 300. And let's say this number is 700. Okay, so, and I'll put numbers here. So let's say it's a set of 4 tires for, I don't know, $200 or $175. Okay, so if the highest price that American tire manufacturers can charge is $175, right? Because if they charge $176, no American consumers are going to buy from them at all. So 175 becomes the price. At that price, American people want to buy 700 sets of tires, but American tire manufacturers are only willing to make 300 sets of tires. So then here's my question. Where are these 400 tires coming from?
Foreign suppliers.
Yeah, right. So these must be the imports. Right. So in this case, since we're pretending that the only two countries are America and China, this says that Americans will buy 700 sets of tires, 300 of which come from America, and 400 of which come from China. So far, so good. Okay. Any thoughts, feelings, comments, concerns at this stage? Do you want to take a 5-minute break?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So who is to say if the price is the same? And I'm not trying to get like crazy. I just want to understand. Who's to say that that initial 400 is going to be bought from American tires first? Or not the first 300, right? Like,
Oh,
why are we going to sell out first before if it's the same and we don't see any
I
benefit?
see. Yeah. So, so this isn't like an order in which things are purchased. This is more like a composition of what like how many tires are coming from each place. So, if you went to the store and you had the choice between, $175 for a Chinese tire or $175 for an American tire, the idea is like you wouldn't really care and you just pick one, right? And so like maybe the first 500 tires, like maybe 400 of them are Chinese and 100 are American. It's just I guess what I'm trying to show here is at this price at $175, right? Because remember, what we can do is we can get, if I know your demand curve and I know the price, I can figure out how many you're going to buy. Does that seem familiar?
Yeah.
Right. And so at $175, we know that 700 sets of tires are going to be sold or bought rather. Right.
Yep.
Okay. And by the same token, if I'm looking at the supply curve and I know what the price of, in this case, tires is, I can look at the supply curve and tell you how many tires are going to be made, right? And so here I've stipulated that this supply curve is only for US producers of tires, right? So it doesn't, like, the Chinese tires are not in this supply curve at all, okay? And so what this says is that at $175 per set, American tire companies are going to make 300 sets of tires. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
So then what we're doing is we're saying, okay, I know Americans are going to buy 700 sets of tires, and I know Americans are only going to make 300. So then where are the remaining 400 tires coming from? Well, that's got to be, in this case, from China.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, it really does. Sorry.
Okay. No, don't be sorry. One, I didn't explain all that fully, all that well. And two, I am 99% confident you're not the only one that was wondering. So asking questions is only helpful for me, for you, and for everyone else. So thank you for asking the question. Okay, do you want a 5-minute break or not so much?
Yep.
Okay, let's take 5 minutes or so. Let's come back at like 6:57. All right, and then we'll go on from there. Okay, so, and this time I actually paused the recording, so I don't have 5 minutes or whatever of just empty stuff. Okay, so let's kind of like pick up where we left off. So remember, consumer surplus is all the area below the demand curve and above the price, right? So then where is consumer surplus? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to label a whole bunch of shapes with some letters just to kind of like make this easy. So like if I say A, what I mean is like this triangle right here. Okay, so this whole triangle here is A. This like weird trapezoidy kind of shape is B. This triangle right here is C. This is D is this one. Here's E, F, G, H, and I. And I can do that. Does everyone kind of see how I'm labeling these things and like it makes sense? Okay, so what shape or shapes are consumer surplus on this graph?
A.
Okay, so A is one, right? That's definitely going to be true. Any others?
B, C, and D.
Yeah, B, C, and D as well, right? Because remember, the consumer surplus is all the area above the price and below the demand curve. Well, the price here is PW, right? And so this, all that area up there, that's got to be the consumer surplus. And then what shape or shapes is going to be the producer surplus?
F.
F is below the supply curve. All right, so remember, producer surplus is all the area above the supply curve and below price.
Above the supply curve.
E.
Yeah, it should just be E, right? And that's it. So the gains from trade in international terms are like this whole big triangle right here for the consumers and this little triangle right here for the producers. So like what's weird about it is it's not symmetrical anymore, right? Remember with like in the first case, it'd be like A was consumer surplus and B and E were producer surplus, right? And like the triangles ended at the same point, but here they're ending at different points, right? So you have this giant one here and this little bitty guy right here, right? And so who ends up winning from international trade? Well, that would be the consumers because they pay lower prices. And here's kind of the crazy thing that we could think about. If you think about it, if we blocked international trade and we said, hey, we're just not going to do it. We're closing the borders, shutting it down, nothing in or out, we're done, right? Well, then consumer surplus would be A, and producer surplus would be B and E, and C and D would be nothing. But with international trade, B changes hands and goes from producers or like big companies to consumers, right? And then consumers also get C and D, right? So like the total gains are these under international trade. And the total gains from like closing the borders entirely would just be A, B, and E, right? So in other words, international trade makes consumers way better off than the losses to the producers, which is like kind of cool if you think about it, right? If it's like, I don't know if it's cool to you, but it's like, I see it and I'm like, whoa, that's awesome. Does that kind of make some sense? Cool. Okay. So now what I want to do is complicate this even further. Okay. So let's clear the board. And let's add in a tariff now. Okay, so And I'll write really, really big for this, just to make absolutely sure that everyone can see, everything. P, Q. Okay, I've got my downward sloping US demand curve. I've got my upward sloping US supply curve. Okay, I've got my, I'm going to skip the equilibrium price because we don't need it anymore. I've got my world price. Okay, and that's going to introduce, some amount of stuff that consumers are going to buy, and it's going to be bigger than the amount of stuff that domestic consumers are going to produce. Okay, and now let's say we slap a tariff on this. Okay, so now anytime you import something, you, the consumer, have to pay a special tax. Okay, and I don't want to like dive into it, so I'm going to make a statement real quick, and if you want after class, I'll prove to you why it's the case. But for now, if you want to just like trust me on it, then we can save ourselves some time, but I'm more than happy to prove it after class. So let's say, so what I've just said is if you have a tariff, what happens is the consumers pay a higher price. A lot of people will say, all right, well, let's just make, the foreign producers pay the tariff. We'll charge them the tax. They're just going to pass it on to you, the consumer. And so what ends up happening is you still pay the higher price. And so it doesn't actually matter. What we say is like who bears the incidence of the tax. So like whether you, the buyer, have to pay it, or if we make the seller pay it, you, the buyer, are still going to pay at least some fraction of the tax. And it'll always be the same amount. So what ends up happening is if we put a tariff on here, and remember tariffs are just a tax on imports, what happens is we just shift this world price up by the amount of the tariff. Okay, so let's say PW with a tariff. Okay, and so what we get is some new quantity demanded with a tariff and some new quantity supplied with the tariff. Okay, so a couple things should jump out to you right away. Okay, so first off, the amount of, we're going to talk about tires still, I suppose. Okay, the total amount of tires that is being purchased is going to decrease. And that makes sense because the price went up, which means people are going to buy less of them. But the total amount of tires that we're going to buy from American firms increased, right? So the total amount of tires that we buy decreases, but we're going to buy more tires from American companies or domestic companies. Does that kind of make sense? Like how I just determined that?
Can you repeat that part
Yeah.
again?
Absolutely. So what we're showing, right? So when the tariff takes effect, and remember, tariffs just raise the world price by the amount of the tariff. So like this is the tariff, right? So let's kind of like back up for a second. You know how when you go to like the grocery store or the gas station, you buy a candy bar and the price on the sticker says like $1.50, right? And then you get to the cash register and they say, it'd be $1.59, and you'll be like, you ain't getting my 9 cents, right? And you get all upset about that. You guys get upset about that? Yeah. What's the 9 cents?
It's tax.
Yeah, it's a sales tax. So Michigan has a 6% sales tax. And so on $1.50, that's 9 cents. So the price of the candy bar is $1.50 plus a 9 cent tax. So here, what we're saying is there's like the world price for tires, and then there's a tax on it. And so this PWT is that like dollar is like the $1.59 analog, right? It's the price with the tax included. And so at higher prices, American buyers of tires will buy fewer tires, right? Because now they're all just more expensive, right? So you just buy less. And that's what like the first law of demand talks about, is that as prices go up, you buy fewer or less, okay? But on the supplier's side, when the price goes up, well, domestic producers of tires are going to make more, right? So they're actually going to increase their production of tires, right? Even though Americans in general are decreasing their consumption of tires. So if we put those same numbers back up, which I think I had, this was 300, this was 700, okay? And so let's just make up some more numbers. This middle number was 500. So let's say this is 400 and this is 600. Okay. So before the tariff, we were importing 400 tires, right? That was this right here. So pre-tariff, right? We import 400 tires, right? Sorry that I wrote that in small. I keep forgetting. And then after tariff, right? Well, here we're buying 600 tires and American tire companies are producing 400. So we're going to only import 200. Right? Okay. So in other words, the effect of the tariff is to decrease the amount of tires that we, in this case, buy, increase the amount of tires that American tire companies produce, right? And because of that, we're going to import fewer tires than we did before. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, so now I'm going to really piss you off because remember all those letters? We're doing it again. Okay, so here's A. Okay, this like four-sided shape here. This little triangle right here is B. I've got C, D, E, F, and G. Okay, and I'll spare trying to trick you. We don't need any of these. Okay, so in with the tariff, what shape or shapes would be consumer surplus? Okay, so I'm going to say, if you have an answer, shout it out. Without CS, PS.
A and B.
Yeah, just A and B, right? So the consumer surplus with the tariff is going to be A and B. And the producer surplus with the tariff is what shapes?
C, D, E, F, G.
No,
No, not G, just C, D, E, F.
C and
Wait.
D? But D is below the supply curve.
So it's just C.
So C for sure. Anything else above supply and below price?
So C and G.
Yeah, C and G.
Okay.
Right? Because remember, G is underneath this price too, and it's still above the supply curve. So it's got to be producer surplus. Oh, I did this. Here we go. Sorry. This goes up here. Okay. Now, what if we did not have the tariff? What shape or shapes would be the consumer surplus?
that should be A, B, C, D, E, F.
Yeah. A, B, C, D, E, and F. And that leaves just G as the producer surplus without the tariff. Right? Okay. So now we have kind of a puzzle, right? What happens to D, E, and F as a result of the tariff? Right? Because we can agree that before the tariff, D, E, and F were consumer surplus. It was value that consumers got over and above the price, or the extra like feeling good that they got from those purchases. So then what happens to D, E, and F as a result of the tariff?
They're effectively just eliminated.
Okay, so two of them are, but one's not, right? And so here's kind of the crazy thing. So can we agree that this bottom line here is like the width of it is 200, right? So it's the imports, right? I'm just going straight up from down here, right? So this thing is 200 units wide, or 200 sets of tires wide, and its height is the tariff. And so like, let me ask you this. So remember, let's go back to the $1.59, candy bar example. If you bought 10 candy bars, how much tax are you going to pay? All right, so each candy bar is $1.50. There's a 6% sales tax. So each candy bar costs $1.59 after taxes, right? And if you bought 10 of them, how much would you pay in taxes? Total. In cents. So, okay, if it's $1.50 on the sticker and you have to pay $1.59 at the register, there's 9 cents per unit on, for the tax, and you're buying 10 candy bars. So like, what's 9 times 10?
Not 90.
Yeah, 90 cents, right? And so here's kind of the thing. We have sort of like the 9 cents right here as the height of this like E of shape E, right? So shape E is whatever the amount of the tariff is, right? That's the height. The width is how many units that tariff applies to. And so if I got the area of that square, well, then that should just be tax revenue. Right, so E is just the revenue that we generate from the tariff. So far, so good? Okay, let's think about F, right? So F is, if you think about it, before the tariff, we were buying 700 sets of tires. After the tariff, we're only buying 600. So this base of the triangle is the 100 tires that we're no longer purchasing, right? That we would purchase if the tariff wasn't there, okay? But now we're not. And so we call F, so F is what we call a deadweight loss. Because if you think about it, there's 100 sets of tires that we as Americans were willing to buy, but now we're no longer buying only because the tariff exists, right? So it's like foregone or like lost opportunities for gains from trade. Does that make sense? Okay. And then D, well, the base down here is the increased production of tires that the US firms are going to do, right? But here's kind of the question that I want you to think about. If the Chinese tires are so, let me think about how I can ask this. Who do you think in this particular example, who is better at producing tires? The Chinese tire companies or the American tire companies? And by better, I mean like who can do it cheaper?
Chinese.
Yeah, China can, right? And so here's the thing. If China can do it cheaper, which means they use less resources to make tires, right, than the US firms do, then having Americans do it is tantamount or like the same as hiring someone who is not good at a task to do it when someone better could do it cheaper. Right? And so D is also a deadweight loss to society because we have less efficient producers of tires producing more tires than they otherwise would. Right, so you could think about D as the value of the extra resources that American companies need to produce those extra tires that Chinese companies or Chinese tire manufacturers would not need. Does that kind of make sense? Right?
The only piece that I really don't understand in all of this
Yeah.
is why American companies are going to produce more when
Yeah.
they're not seeing any more gains.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that's a really great question. So remember we talked about how I think like the P star before was equal to 200 and this is 175, right? And we said that if American tire companies charged more than $175, nobody would buy from them. Does that sound familiar and make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's say the tariff is like, I don't know, how about $10? Right. So it's a really low tariff, but it's a tariff. Okay. And so what that means is that this new world price with the tariff is $185, which means like if China is going to sell tires in America, they're going to charge $175 plus $10 in tax. Right? So that's $185. And so now American companies can charge $185.
Mhm.
Right?
Got it.
And so, yeah, so that's why they're going to make more because they're earning more per tire.
I got it.
Cool.
Sorry. Yeah,
No, don't be sorry.
that makes sense. That makes
No.
sense.
Good. Okay,
Because they
good.
are actually seeing more money.
Yeah,
Yes.
they are getting more money, not just more money, but they're getting more money per tire too. Right? So they're able to charge more for their tires and they're selling more tires. Right? And so what this D is saying is that the American companies are producing more tires, but they're wasting resources that we could have not used, right? And in a world where we care about, scarce resources, not wasting things at all, that sounds bad, right? Having someone who's not good at something do it is generally speaking not a good idea. Okay, it's kind of like if the Aquinas men's basketball team was like, hey, Hunter's hurt, let's send in Dave. And I'd be like, that is a really bad idea. Do not do that. You should forfeit the game because I will cause injuries and possibly death just by like sheer, lack of coordination, right? I can jog up and down the court really slowly for like hours on end. But if you put a ball in my hand, it is probably going to hit someone in the eye. And it's going to be one of the people in the stands, not someone on the court. Okay, so like, no, bad idea. Okay. And so like D is kind of like the basketball coach turning to me and being like, hey, Dave, I need you to play instead of Hunter. And I'd be like, that's stupid. Don't do that. Hunter should play, right? Okay. So all this, right, is here. So you ready for like the single most complicated picture you'll probably ever see in your life? Do you know where I'm going with it? Cool. Okay. So what if I put, and I'll try to draw all the shapes such that I can make the letters really big. Here's that. Here's that. And I'll just put world price really low. Whatever, close enough to a star. How's that for a complicated picture? So what if I were to ask you, hey, if there's no international trade whatsoever between these two countries, what shape or shapes are consumer surplus or producer surplus? Could you answer that question? Right, so the question really is coming down to which one of these three prices is like the one you should use. Okay, so P star, this is no international trade. This is tariff, right? But still international trade. And this is no tariff, but international trade, right? And so that's like fundamentally what the question is about, is figuring out, you know, which one of these prices to look at. So if I said like, hey, there's no international trade, well, then consumer surplus would just be A, because it's the only shape that's above price and below the demand curve, right? If I said, hey, there is international trade, but there's a tariff, what's consumer surplus? Well, okay, that's going to be this price. So it'd be A, B, C, and D, right? And if I said, hey, there's international trade and there's no tariff, well, then that's this price down here. And so consumer surplus would be all the shapes except J, right? And then we could do the same thing for producer surplus. So for producer surplus with no international trade, B, E, J. If you want to think of it this way, you could think of producer surplus as like profit, right? So more producer surplus means more profit. So B, E, and J would be producer surplus with no international trade. With a tariff, it'd be E and J, and with no tariff, it would just be J, right? And then you could get into like what the tax revenue is, right? So the tax revenue from a tariff would be G and H, and F and I would be those deadweight loss triangles. I know I went through that all like super, super fast. Okay, but does that kind of make sense how you would like go about, you know, looking at that? It's really just comes down to, based on the question, can you tell me if P star, PWT, or PW are the prices that we should look at, right? And then you just go from there. Is that cool?
Could you repeat what G and H are there for me one time?
Yeah, so if there's a tariff and international trade, then G and H would be the tax revenue or the tariff revenue. Right, because like this down here would be the amount of imports with the tariff. And then this height here is the tariff per unit. So I would just multiply the units times the tariff per unit, and I would get, or dollars per unit, I guess you could think of it, right? And that would give me the total dollars in tariff revenue.
Did you
Right.
say that the deadweight loss was I and J?
F and
F.
I.
F and I, okay.
Yep. Okay, so J is always producer surplus, no matter what, right? So even if there's no tariff and there's international trade, J is still going to be producer surplus. Okay, but it's better that, like, rather than like memorize this kind of stuff, it's better to like understand, you know, it's above supply and below price. That's producer surplus, and that's just a matching game, right? And it's better to understand that consumer surplus is below demand and above price, right? And the question is which price, right? So, because I might put something like this, like related to this, on next week's learning celebration, and I'll use different letters, right? Because I obviously can't stop you from like looking at, you know, the lecture notes and everything, or like watching this video again. So I'll just use different letters, right? Okay, we'll talk about the learning celebration at the end. Okay, so like, don't worry, that's coming. Don't ask me questions right now. Cool? Okay, sweet. Okay, so, okay, there's that. Okay, now, let's try to figure out if we can like determine a way to figure out how many imports there actually will be. Okay, so let's say we have like the United States. Okay, and then we have like France, right? Some other hypothetical country that may or may not exist, right? And let's say we're talking about wine. Okay, so like, who makes the better wine, US or France?
France.
Yeah, most people say France does, right? And so it would stand to reason that the United States would on net import wine from France, right? So like, it's almost certainly true that like there are some California wines that French people are like, oh, we will eat or drink that wine, right? And so like, that's, there we go, right? So like, there's, you know, within the category of wine, there's differences, but for the most part, I bet the US imports more wine from France than they import from us. Is that probably true or seem fair? Okay, so the question then is like, can we figure out how much wine the US will import? Okay. And here's the crazy thing. I'll give you a hint. The answer is yes. Okay. So we could do it kind of like the long way. And we could say, you know, hey, there's some price, there's some quantity, right? The US demand for wine is downward sloping. The US supply for wine is upward sloping. And there's some PW, right? And so what we could do is say there's some quantity demanded and there's some quantity supplied, right? And imports are just equal to the amount that we purchase minus the amount that we produce ourselves. Does that kind of make sense? So like before, when I said, hey, this was 700 tires and this was 300 tires, right? So then we're importing 400. Well, now I've just written it a little more general, right? It's the amount that we buy minus the amount that we as Americans produce, right? That must be the amount that we import, okay? And so what if I what if the world price like got lower? Right? So if the world price suddenly was lower, right? Well, okay, we can handle that. Right? Well, now, I'll get rid of that. We'd have like this blue QD and this blue QS, right? And so again, right, imports, and I'm using blue instead of just writing like different things, right? Well, it'd still be QD minus QS, but can we agree that at like the blue world price, the amount of which is lower than the black world price, right? Can we agree that the blue imports are greater than the black imports? Does that kind of make sense? Or did I write too small?
It's pretty small, and I have a really hard time telling the difference between that blue and black on your graph.
Okay. I don't have any other colors. Let me tell you what, let me just clear it and I'll make it really big. Or actually, yeah, let's take a 5-minute break and I'm gonna do something really clever and then we'll solve all the problems. Cool?
Thank you.
All right, let's do that. So come back at 7:39, 7:40-ish. Okay, so I'm just moving this over to a fancy iPad screen where I can write on this. Right now, technically, you can all write on this too by just like clicking and dragging across the screen. Please don't do that. It tends to mess up everything for other people as well. So please don't do that. And if you do, I forgive you, I guess. I don't know. Okay. Okay. So what were we trying to do? What the hell are we talking about?
Blue and the black line.
Yeah.
How much wine the US will import?
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Thanks. Okay. So first off, can you see this better?
Much better.
Cool. Okay. So I've got my price, I've got my quantity. Okay. And I've got my, downward sloping demand by the US firms. I've got my upward sloping supply for the US firms. Right. And we said, hey, there was some world price. And we just come, straight over. And then we come straight down. All right, and there's the quantity demanded, at this world price. Here's the quantity supplied at this world price, right? And so like this right here is the imports, right? And we're all good with that so far. Okay, and so then what I was trying to do was say, hey, here's a lower world price. And I just come, straight over, just like I did. And I've got to fix my demand curve a little bit, but that's okay. Right? And we come straight down and I messed this up, but that's okay because we can fix it. Oops. Okay. And then we hit here, come straight down, quantity supplied. And so like this right here is like the blue imports, right? And we can agree that at this lower world price, these imports are bigger, right? So like if the price was lower, we would import more. Does that so far make sense? Okay. And so what I'm kind of trying to get us to think about is, can we make some, really clear relationship between the world price and imports. Okay, and so the answer to this question is yes. And the concept is called the import demand curve. Okay, so let me see. So let me flip back to this picture here. All right, the other advantage of using the iPad is I can flip back to pictures and not have to redraw them. Okay, so if we flip back to this, right, what is sort of the relationship between world price and imports? So like as world price goes down, what happens to imports?
They increase.
Yeah, they increase, right? So like if world price goes down, imports increases, right? And I guess I could put a comma here. Okay. And likewise, we could also say that like if world price were to go up, then imports would go down, right? That seems true. Okay. And so the question then becomes, you know, can we make sort of a general statement for this? Okay. And we can, right? So what we would need to do is we would need to express the supply and demand equations in terms of Q, right? So like, let's say, so I'm going to just redraw the same picture, right? So here's D US, S US, right? It's not sus like in Among Us, right? It's just supply US, okay? And we have our world price. All right, I'm only going to draw one world price because, you know, it's just for illustrative purposes. Okay, and so let's say the demand curve was given by P is equal to, I don't know, 100 minus 10Q. And the supply curve is given by P is equal to, I don't know, how about 10 plus 5Q, right? I'm making these up, you know, as we're going, right? And we could say this is D and S, right? Well, if I wanted to figure out what the imports are at any given price, I just have to solve these two equations here in terms of Q, in terms of the Qs. So, okay, we can do that, right? So let's start with the demand. So P is equal to 100 minus 10 QD. Okay, I'm going to add 10Q to both sides, and I'm going to subtract P all in like one step. And so that's going to give me 10 QD is equal to 100 minus P. Did everyone see how I did that? Nothing too tricksy, right? And then I just divide both sides by 10, and I get QD is equal to 10 minus 0.1 P. That so far so good? Okay, and then I could do the same thing for QS. So P is equal to 10 plus 5QS. This time I am going to subtract 10 from both sides. All right, so that gives me P minus 10 equals 5QS. Divide by 5, divide by 5, divide by 5, right? And that'll give me QS is equal to 0.2 P minus 2, right? And if imports are always equal to, so if imports equals QD minus QS, then I just have to do that, right? So I'm going to redraw this line, right? So QD minus QS, well, that's got to be equal to 10 minus 0.1 P minus, and here's kind of the important thing. You need that parenthesis there. 0.2 P minus 2. Okay, I'm going to distribute the minus sign. I'm going to have to switch to a new sheet. So bear with me because I'm going to be flipping back and forth because I don't have this memorized and I don't have it written down in front of me. Okay, so QD minus QS is equal to 10 minus 0.1. Oops. Whatever. Wait a minute. Okay. 0.2 minus 2. Okay. 0.2 P minus 2. Okay, that should be right. Okay, so this equals 10 minus 0.1 P minus 0.2 P plus 2, right? Because you're subtracting a negative, right? And so that's a positive. All right, so that's just 10 minus 0.3 P plus 2, which is 12 minus 0.3 P. Right? And so what we could say is that imports are equal to 12 minus 0.3, whatever the price is. Right? So if the world price was 10, right? Well, then we just plug 10 in for P and we get 12 minus 0.3 times 10, right? And that's just 12 minus 3, which is equal to 9. Right? And we could solve for the amount of imports at any given price much, much faster. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. And so this equation right here is known as the import demand curve. So if I were to draw it, I could say that if I have like the world price and then this is imports, that's the import demand curve. Does that kind of make sense? Right? So like this graph right here is exactly the same thing as the hell happened. Well, whatever apparently it went away. Okay, so as this. All right, so here, I'll just put it here. PWI ID. Does that make sense? Janelle, if you want to turn the lights on in that classroom, you might find it a little more comfortable. But it's up to you. You can do whatever you want. Okay. Okay, so because right now you're just like blasted with monitor light and like, whoa. Hey, there we go. Okay, so now let's think about the same kind of thing from the perspective of France. Okay, so this is kind of like kind of an interesting-ish case. So France should have like a downward sloping demand curve for their wine. That's the demand for French people for wine. And they should have an upward sloping supply curve for wine. But here's kind of the thing. For them, if they're going to be exporting wine, then where is the world price? Is it going to be, so like this would be, no international trade whatsoever. Where would world price be if they're exporting wine?
I'm assuming it's still gonna be lower than the equilibrium price.
So it's gonna be down here.
Mhm.
Well, if it were down here, right, then French people would be buying more wine than French people are producing, so they'd be importing. Right? So it can't be below, it actually has to be above, which means in this case, they're producing more wine than the French people actually want to produce. Or, I'm sorry, consume. And so here, this extra wine that they're making, well, these must be the exports. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. And so here, exports, the amount of the exports, right, must be equal to QS minus QD. And we could see, you know, kind of the same thing. If the world price were to go up, then French people would buy less wine themselves, but French winemakers would make more wine, right? And so exports would have to increase, right? Okay. So it turns out we can do kind of the same thing. So if I, let me just make another sheet. Okay, so before, you know, we had the world price. This was the import demand. Well, it turns out we can make another one, and this is imports on the x-axis. We can make another graph that would look kind of like this. We'd have exports, right? And we'd have an upward sloping curve. Nope, hang on. And we would call this one the export supply, right? Is that kind of, so like at higher world prices here, right? So as the world price goes up, right? So PW up, then exports should go up as well. And if world price goes down, then exports should go down, right? Sorry, I had to clear my throat real quick. Okay, so this is the same kind of thing we just talked about, but backwards, right? So if the world price goes up, you want to export more. If the world price goes down, you want to export less, okay? And so that gets us an upward sloping export supply curve, or we could just call it an ES curve. And here's where something like really clever has to come into play. If, let's say, the only two countries that exist are the US and France, the only thing they're trading is wine, right? So if France exports 100 bottles of wine, how many bottles of wine did the US import?
100.
Yeah, right. So if the only two countries are the US and France is exporting 100 bottles, well, that means that the US had to import 100 bottles. In other words, imports have to be equal to exports, right? Like that has to be true. And so the clever thing we can do is we can take these two pictures and combine them into one and say, hey, there's this world market. We have the import demand curve. We have the export supply curve. And then check this out. This gets us our equilibrium world price. And this gets us our equilibrium, you know, import quantity of imports and exports. So this could be imports or exports. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, and so now, rather than try to draw this by hand, I'm gonna cheat. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing this screen. Oops, if I can figure out how to do that. And I'm gonna share a different screen that's also in in the notes for you. And I guess I'll just grab this one. Okay, so, oh, that's why I messed it up. Okay, so I guess I do have to draw it. Okay, screw it, we'll draw it. Okay, so what we've got is over here, we might have the US market. Over here, we might have the France market. And then in the middle, we've got sort of the world. Right now, again, world in this context is just the US and France. Okay, and so you've got supply. This is where I hate the fact that I have to do this. Okay, so we have here, and then we have here. Okay, and then if I'd drawn this to scale, which in the notes, once I fix the drawing, it will be to scale and everything will work out perfectly. Here. Nope. Here. Good enough. Okay, so so this is PW, P, Q, Q. Okay, so what we end up with is this being the world price. Okay, so here's PW star. And this world price comes straight over here. So we get QD, we got QS, and we've got QSF for France, QDF for France. And again, if I'd drawn this right, QD minus QS must be equal to QSF minus QDF. Does that kind of make sense? So where the world
Yes.
price, oh, go. So
Yeah, I'm saying yes because exports equals imports, so they have to
Yeah.
equal each other.
yeah,
So
right,
like
so-
it just looks funny because you had to hand draw it.
Yeah, so it looks poor because, like you said, I drew it by hand, right? But when I get this fixed, so I worked really hard on the slide one and I messed it up tonight. So I'll fix it after class tonight. But this distance here, this is exports, right? This is imports, and exports has to be equal to imports. So had I drawn it to scale and correctly, then those two distances would be the same. And so what you can start kind of thinking about, and this is where it ties into your industry or whatever it is that you are doing, is you can start thinking about, you know, if my firm, hang on, I'm going to clear my throat again. Okay, if your company is exporting something, well, what you want to do is you want to try to figure out a way to increase the other country's demand for that product, right? Because if you can do that, you'll shift the import demand curve to the right, which means a higher price, which means you can start selling more of those products at a higher price. Does that kind of make sense? So I know, like, up until that second, all of this was just like, can Dave do fancy algebra? And the answer is yes, and it had no point. But now it's like, oh, if you're France, what you want to do is you want to cause like US demand to increase, right? So if you cause US demand to increase, that'll increase import demand, right? Which will raise the world price, which means you can now sell Americans more stuff at higher prices. Does that kind of make sense? Alternatively, if you were like nefarious, right, what else could you do? Well, you could try to make it illegal for American producers to make it, thereby shifting their supply curve to the left, right? So this is what actually France has done with champagne. So you guys know that the only place to get champagne is from France, right? What's it called if you make it in the United States?
Sparkling wine,
Yeah, sparkling wine, right? Why is it called sparkling wine?
because it's illegal to call it champagne because it's not made in France.
Exactly, right? So if you want to buy champagne, it has to come from Champagne, France. It cannot come from anywhere else. And here's kind of the dirty secret. Champagne is just sparkling wine. That's all it is. But people like the brand name or whatever, champagne. And so if you can make it illegal for people to produce something called champagne, well, guess what? The supply curve shifts left for that country, which also increases the import demand curve, right? And causes a higher world price for you, right? So why are like international trademarks, international patents, all these kinds of things so fiercely defended? Well, if they weren't, then the supply curve in the importing country would slowly start shifting to the right. And that's something that you, as an exporter, don't want them to do. What do you think about that? Right. So remember all those like those of you who recently graduated or like can remember back to college, remember all those times that like different professors in different departments or whatever were like, my subject's the most important because you always see my subjects when you're out in the world, right? They were all full of shit. My subject is the one that's everywhere, right? With this simple, like kind of simple graph, I can explain why like international patents are so important, why we don't really like it when other countries like try to rip off intellectual property, right? It's all right here, right? They're all just saying like wishy-washy nonsense. I can put like graphs and numbers to it, right? And so like that's where this stuff kind of shines, is like when you can figure it out, all sorts of cool stuff ends up happening. Okay. You could also, you know, so in addition to trying to like screw over the importing country, you could try to figure out better ways to make your own product, which is typically what you guys always think about. Because if you do, you'll shift out the export supply curve. It'll lower world price, but that's okay because you'll make it up on volume, right? So we got all that in here as well. Kind of cool. Okay, so let's try to like think through some examples. Okay, so remember we have the US is the importer, France is the exporter. Okay, and so let's try to figure out, you know, some pattern predictions about what we could do. So let's say the US becomes better at producing wine. Okay, so if the US is just better at making wine, what curve in the US market is that going to shift?
The demand should go to the right.
Okay, so yeah, so if American wine tastes better, right, then more people will want to buy it. So, okay, I phrased the question poorly. Let's say the US becomes more efficient at producing wine. So it's just cheaper for us to make wine. Now what curve moves?
Supply curve
Yeah, supply curve, right? In which way does it move?
goes to the right.
Yeah, it should go to the right. Okay, so the supply curve is going to go to the right. And remember, the US is determining the import demand curve, right? And so what's going to happen to the world market? Which way is the import demand going to shift, left or right?
Left.
Yeah, it's going to shift left. Okay. Which means the world price is going to come down. Right. And if the US becomes more efficient at producing wine, does the supply and demand in France change at all?
No.
No. In fact, it's not like the French people are going to be like, oh, well, if the US is better at producing wine, then we like wine better, right? That would be the demand curve in France shifting, and that's not going to happen, right? And French producers, they're not getting any better. They're as good as they were. Only the American ones got better. And so what happens to what happens to the amount of wine that France will export if the US becomes better at producing wine?
It decreases.
Yeah. So French exports will decrease. And so how do the French winemakers feel?
They're not happy.
Right. Okay. So like you see how all this kind of stuff, connects in together, and thinking about, all the things that will happen. Okay. So now let's do kind of a different one, right? So let's say, we've got the US, we've got the world, and we'll put that kind of like this. And then we've got, France. Oops. Okay. Demand, supply, import, demand, export, supply, demand, supply. Yeah, thank God we switched to the iPad. There's no way I could have drawn this on the whiteboard. Okay. So now let's say that Americans, let's do this. Do you guys remember a few years ago, we found out that drinking like 1, maybe 2 glasses of wine a night is actually like good for your heart? Okay, so let's say Americans realize health benefits of wine drinking. Okay, but the French people haven't figured it out, so they don't know about this yet. So what curve is going to move?
The American demand curve.
Yeah, so the American demand curve will move, right? It'll shift to the right. And then what's that going to do to the import demand curve? What do you think?
It's also going to move to the right.
Yeah, it should also move to the right. Right? And so world price is going to go up. Right? And at that higher world price, how are the French producers of wine feeling?
Good.
Yeah, they're like, hell yeah, this is great. Those Americans are buying more of our wine. Right? And so here, right, French exports will increase, which, just so we're on the same page, is the same thing as saying US imports will increase. All right, those are the exact, like these two statements are exactly the same thing. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah, so you can like play around with this stuff and think about, what happens if like something goes on in France. So like if let's say there was like a hurricane or something that went through France and destroyed all of their vineyards, right? Well, okay, that's going to shift the French supply curve, right? Which means to the left, which means the export supply curve should shift left, right? And so that just means that the world price will go up and Americans will import less wine, right, than we did at the lower one. Does that kind of make sense? I went through that one super fast, but I feel like I feel like I'm burning out of interest in this stuff. And so I want to like show you that it not just applies to like the US, but we can do also, you know, how storms are going to affect, you know, international markets as well. And so you can start understanding that stuff. And if you get really like into understanding like the stock market and investments, you can use this information to figure out like what things you should short, what things you should buy and hold, right? All kinds of fun stuff. So now you can start doing financial advising, right? And thinking about like international investing, which is like kind of cool. Or you can start thinking about, you know, with your boss, be like, hey, you know, France is about to get hit with some serious weather, and we buy something from France, right? And so like maybe we should stock up on whatever our product is and sell it later. All kinds of stuff you could do. Okay. Any thoughts, feelings, comments, or concerns about any of this stuff from tonight? All like kind of cool, but like somewhat tedious. Hopefully more cool than tedious. Okay, so let me, God, I keep hitting the wrong thing. Let me stop sharing and I will spotlight on myself. Okay, so what I want to do, and I guess I can leave. No, I'll do this. Okay, so what I want to do for the last like, I don't know, 20 minutes maybe, is just talk about how next week's going to work. Okay, so next week is learning celebration number 1. I call them learning celebrations because years ago, some educational psychology person told me that the word test or the word exam sounds scary. And so we should replace those words with something that sounds fun. And so now it's a learning celebration because who doesn't like to celebrate things? Okay, so don't be scared, right? Because it's not a test, it's a celebration. It's kind of like a party. Okay. So what's going to happen? So I haven't written it yet, so don't ask me like what's on it because I don't really know. So what's going to happen is on basically Monday night, I'm going to send you like a PDF with, you know, 4, 5 questions. Okay. Nothing like super math intensive, you know, nothing harder than what we've just done. Like this is by far the hardest problem that could ever exist. Okay. And I will give you as much information in that problem as I can, you know, without literally giving away the answer. Right. And I'll make like if there's math, it will work out in a way that you don't actually need a calculator and you can just do it all on scratch paper. Hi, Sydney's kid. And so, yeah, so you have to just, you know, figure out the answer, write it down, or it'll be like essay type questions where, you know, it's based on what we've talked about, what's on Course Connect, what's on this video or these videos, I should say. Okay. And there it's just kind of, you know, connecting the things we've talked about so far together in like a coherent way. Okay. So it's not going to be like definitions, right? Because you can just look that up and that's one that's boring, right? And 2, it's not hard since you can look up whatever you want, right? So I'm not going to ask you to like define terms. But I'll give you kind of like story problems or true, false, and explain kind of problems. For the true, false, and explain, the points will be given for the explanation, not the true or the false. Okay, so remember we said like the first night, I pointed out the difference between like a positive statement and a normative statement and how I'm only ever going to judge you based on the positive stuff, not the normative stuff. Okay, so the true false will be like the normative part. So like, I don't really care which one you pick. Okay, the explain is the positive, right? So if you just write like true, like cool, you got 0 points, even if I happen to agree with you. Okay, and so you got to do the explain part. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. And so that's going to be about it. Does anyone have any more specific? Oh, and then I should say it'll be due Friday at midnight. Okay, so Friday at midnight. I don't have the date. It's like the 17th, I think, is the date. Okay, and so it'll be due Friday the 17th at midnight, and that will give me, Saturday and Sunday to actually grade them. I should have them back to you by, I would say Tuesday at the latest. Okay, and then what I'll do is I'll make a video going over all the answers, insofar as there's like a true and a false component to it. I'll answer both for the true and for the false, but that's just going to be like how I would answer it. And so you should like look at comments that I give you on your answer, right, for specific feedback, I guess. For the math, like if the answer is 7 and you write 7, you got the right answer. Right? If you write 8, no. Okay, but try to show work, right? Because if you show a work, I can see, and you get it wrong, which if you do, right, I can see where the mistake was, and usually it's a really small mistake that ends up compounding. And if it's a really small mistake, but you did everything else right, I can give you a 9 out of 10, right? Because it was a stupid little error somewhere, right? But if you just write, 8 and the answer is 7, and I don't see any work, like I can't say like, oh, you were off, here, right? And it was a stupid little mistake. I don't know, right? And I have to grade what you give me. I can't grade what you don't give me. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, so I'm like, if you talk to anyone who's taken this class before, they will almost certainly tell you that I am overly generous with the partial credit, because I understand some stuff is hard, and especially with mathy things, one teeny tiny mistake somewhere in the beginning can throw you off, for the whole problem, right? And I don't want you to get a bad grade just because you made one little teeny tiny mistake, right? So please, if you're ever like, oh man, should I show Dave this work or not? Show me the work, right? The answer is yes, right? Do not, don't ever feel bad. Like if you send me 25 pages and it's all just a bunch of like random squiggles and algebra or whatever, that's totally fine. I would much prefer getting 25 pages of scratched out scribbly nonsense than one page that has wrong answers. Is that kind of fair? All right, so do not think for one set, do not ever consider like that I have to read it. Just write stuff, right? And I will read it and I will love reading it. Okay. Don't abuse that, obviously. So if it's like the questions about the grocery store, don't tell me about like your cousin in Texas. All right. I don't want to hear about that. That's not fun. But like, so I don't know. I don't know how else to explain it. Do you have any questions that I can answer about this?
Yeah.
Kim.
So so you're posting the celebration on Course Connect, and then do we print it out? And is it because of the fact that you want us to show work? Do we print it and then handwrite the answers?
If you
And
want
then
to, yeah.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do, so I'll put the PDF up on Course Connect just as its own kind of thing, so you can download that. And then below that will be like a thing you can click on to submit your answers. So what I kind of always recommend people do is like download or open the PDF, right? Type out your answers in Word, right? And you don't have to use equation editor or anything like that. Like you don't need anything fancy. Okay, it just, just write, if it's like P minus 2, right? Cool, just type P minus sign 2, right? And then you're good. You don't need to do anything super fancy. Okay, and so then you type all that in Word. And then underneath the PDF will be a separate link, okay? And that separate link will have a bunch of fields where you can either submit a picture or you can copy and paste, text from the Word document, right? And so you submit, and I'll make it crystal clear, like which one is which. So like the PDF will be called, this is the PDF, right? And then the place where you submit answers will be like submit answers here, right? And so the reason I'm going to do it that way is because technically I am not supposed to email you about your grades. They're all supposed to be posted in Course Connect or on my AQ. And so I can't return, a Word document that has graded things on it to you. But I can post it in Course Connect. And the other advantage, so I'm going to say this, I'm going to put a 5-hour time limit on the answer submissions thing. And the only reason I'm going to do that is because there's almost always at least one person who, will copy all their answers into Course Connect. And then at the bottom is a button that says submit. And so they'll like copy everything in and they'll upload the pictures and then they'll just close the window without clicking submit. But if you don't click submit, I never get it. And there's nothing I can do to get those. But if I have a time limit on it, I can set Course Connect to automatically submit it once the time expires. And so that way, like, even if you forget to click submit, Course Connect will submit it for you, right? And so it's a 5-hour time limit on the submission. Like once you click, I'm going to submit my answers now, that 5 hours starts, right? So don't click that link until you're ready to submit your answers, and then just copy and paste. It should not take you 5 hours to copy and paste and upload pictures. I'm just giving you an overly generous amount of time to do that part. Does that kind of make sense? Right. So if you are planning on submitting, your exam Friday at, Friday night, don't click that link until Friday night. And that's it, right? Don't click it Thursday because the 5 hours starts, right? And I'll make that super clear in Course Connect too. Does everyone kind of see how the submission process is going to work? Okay. Sydney, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just had a question because you referenced something last week or the week before about like having to look up information. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. So am I going to have to know how to find our GDP, or is there any kind of thing like that I'm going to have to know? Because we haven't really talked about how to research some things.
Yeah. So on this one, almost certainly not.
Okay.
But I mean, if there's a true, false, uncertain, component to it. So this isn't going to be one of the questions, but let's pretend it is, right? And the question is something like, we should, how can I do this? We should boycott buying stuff from Malaysia because they use child labor, right? So like true, false, and explain. Okay. And so like I have personal beliefs about whether that's true or false. You might have personal beliefs about whether that's true or false. Maybe we agree, maybe we disagree. I don't care, right? I mean, I kind of like as a person I do, but as like your professor, I don't, right? So let's say you were against it. You said, hey, I'm against child labor, right? And so you tell me a story in your answer like, hey, people are abusing children in these countries. Well, send me a link to an article that says this is happening. Does that kind of make sense?
Okay.
Like, and so there, like,
It's some kind of evidence.
yeah, it's just any kind of evidence, right? It's just,
Okay.
it could be a CNN news article, it could be MSNBC, it could be whoever, right?
Okay.
Just like if you have a fact in there, just like send me that fact. Send me a link to something that says, hey, this is where I found that fact.
So
Right.
you don't want like a works cited page.
No, you do not need works cited, not at all.
Okay.
Right. That's stuff you do in undergrad that we make you do just to make you do work. Right. And I'm not into that. So I promise you that unless you go into academia, you will never have to do another works cited page after college ever again, right? And the reason is because literally no one cares, right? You just like, you send an email and you hit Command K or Control K, copy in the URL, and like that's good enough for literally everyone. Okay, so you never have to do a works cited page. But if you're gonna reference a fact, just like show me that fact, right? You know, I don't want you to like come out and be making stuff up. Does that kind of make sense? So it's not a research. It's just like, tell me where you found that. Is that?
Dr. Hebert?
Yeah.
And I might, I know every professor is different. So I apologize if this is asking too much. But the last course we took, the professor would post examples from past tests of the kind of answers he was looking for.
Okay.
And so I was just wondering if that is something, not to see like, oh, these are the types of questions, but it was more like, this is the kind of quality of response I'm looking for. So then we kind of knew the level of response we needed to give.
Yeah.
Is that something that might be possible for us to kind of look at?
If I so tomorrow is my heavy teaching day for the undergrad stuff. And then my wife's friends from out of town have basically told me that I have to hang out with them. So if I can put together some example questions and answers, I will definitely do it, and I'll post it to Course Connect by Saturday morning. But if it's not up Saturday morning, then that means I didn't have the time.
Okay.
Is that kind of fair?
Yeah, no, it's yeah, like I said, it's not like, ooh, I wanna
Yeah.
see like, the types
No,
of questions.
Yeah,
It's
no,
just, yeah, never having done an economics class, and every class is different. It's just
Yep.
helpful for me to kind of just have an idea as to like, okay, don't answer just true or false, and I get responding, but I mean, some people might think responding is 4 sentences. Some people might think it's
Right.
12 pages. So
Right. Yeah. So definitely closer to 4 sentences than 12 pages. Just so we're all clear. Like I would love to read 12 pages per person, but that sounds like a lot. So 4 sentences is probably enough for pretty much every question. I would say no more than 8. But yeah, I'll do my best to get some sample questions and answers, up there for you.
thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? No? Okay. Well, if you do think of anything, feel free to send me an email. I will, despite my wife's friends being in town, I will have my phone, and I have absolutely no problems playing around on my phone in front of people. So feel free. I have no hesitation there whatsoever. I will write back fairly quickly. So, all right, well, cool. Well, thank you for hanging out with me tonight and for putting up with the iPad stuff and all that goodness. And I'll get this video I'm going to stop recording.